It's been a while since I've been up at the Loxahatchee River, but when I first came up here from Florida, I met a gentleman, Richard Procyk, and he shared with me a lot of the great history about this area. It's a fascinating history about American history, about Florida history, about Black Seminole history, about Seminole. And so I am privileged to have Richard with me today to share with you a little bit about that history. Richard, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Well,
what a beautiful scene. This is
it's a gorgeous park.
Yeah, what is the official name of it?
Well, that's interesting. When they bought this place, it was called Riverbend Trailer Park.
Okay.
And the county bought it in 1978, had no clue that it had a marvelous piece of American history that was played out here. And they proceeded to develop the park and didn't realize it was historic and more or less bypassed the history until we came along and remind them that they had to give it its proper due. Recognition of American history,
right here,
where men fought and died here.
Yeah. Now, how did you get in? How did you get involved, though, in terms of? Well, you're from Philadelphia, but you've been here for a while.
For a long time, yes. It's a bit of serendipity in that accidentally I went from prehistoric history into the more or less modern mode. I had friends who were badgering me to give up the Indians in Miami and come up here to Fort Jupiter. And I said, what's at Fort Jupiter? And they said, well, the Seminole Wars were played out here. And I said, well, that's interesting, but the history I'm involved with is thousands of years old, not a couple hundred or 175 to be exact, when the battle took place in this park. But the reason I said serendipity is because I finally retired from the Miami Beach Police Department. I was in charge of homicide for the city. I was with the department for 25 years. How did I get involved with prehistoric history?
Yes, really?
That was always my love.
Okay.
So when I took courses at the university in public administration, I would sneak in courses in anthropology, cultural anthropology, physical anthropology, and I worked with archaeologists in Miami digging mounds, the Tequesta, the Calusa, down in the Keys, and then with the museum who developed another facet, the Institute of Maya Studies.
Yes.
We started to study the Maya. And so we went into Central America, to Tikal and Copan and other places. So by the time I moved up here when I retired, after 25 years on the police department, I was already an old-timer in history. The only thing missing was this newer history.
Let me ask you a quick question, though. You've done all that archaeological study and then all over South America, Central America. When you came here, did you do a similar thing for this area?
Exactly.
What's the one thing you found out about this area?
Big thing I found out, now I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the big thing I found out, there weren't too many people interested in the marvelous history that we had right here in Jupiter.
But I mean from an archaeological standpoint.
Archaeological, well, I found out pretty quickly that the Hobe and the Yega Indians, who were primarily located at the Jupiter Inlet, were pretty much ignored, their history. And finally, the professor from FAU, Gerald Kennedy, came in and did a dig at the mound, the mound where the Du Bois house is located. They built a house in 1878 right on top of a 10,000-year-old Indian mound.
That's fascinating.
And the people that lived, the Du Bois who lived in that house, when they were working around the mound, found all kinds of marvelous, marvelous artifacts.
And is some of that now at the Loxahatchee River Historical Society,
yes,
so that we can go and take a look at it?
Absolutely. I was a docent at that society for 20 years, taking people to the top of the lighthouse.
Yeah.
which is right here. And the reason we have this map, we're going to explain some of this a little bit later.
So this is the lighthouse.
This is the lighthouse.
And where are we located right now?
Right now we're back here. We're all the way right here. Here's where the park is.
I got you.
Right on the river. We're right on the river, and this is where the Battle of the Loxahatchee took place.
Okay. So this is where the battle. So this is the area we're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in this area. And how far back does this kind of history go in terms of 5,000 years or?
Well, the park itself is one of the most significant historical sites in Palm Beach County, probably South Florida. We have evidence in this park archaeologically. I've been here with Bob Carr and the archaeologists, and also with Professor Kennedy when we did our digs. There is evidence of a continual timeline of history that dates back to the archaic period 5,000 years ago. In fact, in a little while, I'll walk you over to a tree and show you the Tree of Tears, which grew out of a 3,000-year-old Indian mound.
Wow, that's fascinating.
The people who were here originally certainly were not the Seminoles. They were the last to come to Florida. The people who were here originally, the Tecusta, the Calusa, the Temucan, the Ayes, the Yega, all these people were here a long time before the Spaniards got here, and the Spaniards got here 200 years before the Seminoles got here.
Okay.
It's an amazing history. Yeah.
It is, and we're having the 500th anniversary of the settlement in Pensacola, but you're saying the Seminoles were here. And how did the blacks get into this area as well? Because we talk about the Seminoles and the blacks.
Well, we have to go back to Columbus for a few seconds, if we can do that.
Yeah.
When Columbus came in, he found, of course, when he found the island of Guahani, that the natives called Guahani, and later he renamed San Salvador, he brought in diseases. All the diseases of the Europeans, the measles, the mumps.
Sure.
The Spaniards realized they had these plantations, they didn't have the labor to work them. So that's when they went to Africa and started to import African slaves. Yeah. And what happened in that process is a lot of the slaves were brought up to the English plantations in Carolinas and Georgia, Alabama. And the Spaniards, believe it or not, were very democratic. They needed labor bad, so they were willing to be democratic.
Okay.
So they said, okay, come on down to Florida, to all the Indians.
Right.
And the African slaves they heard were escaping from the plantations, and this would be a great boom for them if they could get some of the Indians and the African fugitives to come to St. Augustine, which they had established in 1565.
Wow. Well, I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Because we're going to take a break. So we've got Seminoles, we've got black Seminoles, and we've got people coming into Florida. When we come back, we're going to find out a little bit more about the Seminole Wars in Florida, specifically right here in Palm Beach County. Come back.
If I were born too early and too small, it could have cost more than $50,000 just to keep me alive. And that's not counting the long list of health problems that'll follow me throughout my life.
Children's Services Council. Learn more.
Thanks for coming back. I'm sitting here with Richard Procyk, and we're talking about some fascinating history right here in Palm Beach County, in the north part of the county, at the Loxahatchee Battlefield Park. So, Richard, talk about the Second Seminole War, and how did that all happen, and what's so significant about this location right here?
Well, the Second Seminole War was the main war. It was the longest, the bloodiest, the most costly Indian war in American history, costing more than $20 million, more than the American Revolution.
Wow.
More than that, it lasted, if we count the three Seminole Wars, the first one is 1817, 1818, Second one, this war we're going to talk about, 1835 to 1842. And there was a third Seminole War, 1855 to 1858. If we take all three Seminole Wars, we're expanding a period of more than 41 years, from 1817 to 1858.
Sure.
And during that time, the Seminoles held off the Army, the Navy, and the Marines to a standstill, which is remarkable.
It is. It is.
And now we have a new president. I'm jumping ahead. We have Andrew Jackson, the old Indian fighter.
Yeah.
And in 1830, of course, he decided that he would put in the Indian Removal Act,
Sure.
which he did. And in order to remove Indians, he had to remove the 5 civilized tribes. Now, we're talking about the Seminole Wars, but they were only one piece.
Well, I kind of think of that removal as being up in the North Carolina, Georgia area with the Cherokee.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
down here in the Seminoles was part of that removal as well.
Absolutely. What you're talking about is when the Cherokees, 13,000 Cherokees were moved
Sure.
west. They traveled during the cold winter with ice and snow. Well, the only thing I really have a problem with, well, they actually started relocating the Choctaws first. There was a smaller Indian band, and they moved them back in 1830, right at the beginning.
Yeah.
The big removal, of course, was the Cherokee, when 13,000 were moved west. It took them 9 months in movement, and during the winter, cold, harsh winter, that the Cherokees were not allowed to take extra clothes or water or food. The Army would knock at the door and just herd them out,
Sure.
and at gunpoint start the movement. So there was great loss of life. About
Absolutely.
4,000 in the movement died. Then,
But down here, what happened down here?
Down here in Florida, it all starts with one of our most famous characters, Osceola. Osceola was determined that he would not be removed west of the Mississippi, and that was the goal of the U.S. government, to move all the Native Americans and their allies, who were the Black Seminoles,
Right.
west of the Mississippi.
Right.
And he was determined that would not happen. So he started a movement amongst his own people. Some of the Seminoles, not that they were willing to go, but they weighed the situation, and they felt it was better, some felt it was better to go than have their families starve to death
Sure.
or die in battle.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he did it.
There's always the picture of Osceola
Yes.
putting the knife,
Into the treaty.
and stuff. But in Palm Beach County, then, this was kind of like one of the last battles, if you will. What happened there?
Well, the staging area was up in Sanford, Florida today. It was Fort Millen back in those days. And General Jessup came up with a plan to move in 7 columns of soldiers, over 3,000 soldiers, to come down in columns and capture the Seminoles, give them no room to wiggle out.
Okay.
The 7 columns were then reduced to 4 columns, and he led the main column right down the center of the state. He came down from Fort Millen right down to the Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee,
Right.
and traveling slowly for 200 miles
Yeah.
in 20 days through savannas of water, the clothes being ripped off their shoulders, their shoes rotting off their feet. They finally got to the headwaters of the Loxahatchee, right here, right where you're sitting,
Okay.
on January the 24th, 1838.
Got it.
Okay, there he met 300 Seminoles in the last standing battle of the Second Seminole War. And the Seminoles were waiting for them in a typical Seminole fashion battlefield. Which means they always picked a high hammock.
Yeah.
This is a hammock where we are now. It was bumper to bumper trees 175 years ago.
Ah, okay.
Not like it is nice and clean now,
Right.
but 175 trees. And they would go up into the trees, cover themselves with mud and moss, and put their Spanish rifles, cut a little notch in the branches and lay their rifles in and pick off the army as they came through the swamp. What you don't know is just a few yards away, where the Tree of Tears is located, is a huge swamp. It's still there, and we can see it. We can still see
they were
it.
coming through with their guns?
Well, they were on their horses. They were all horsemen, but the horses now are slipping and sliding over the cypress knees. So they had to get off this mount. The water is this deep, and had to hold their rifles like such. And in the meantime, as they're coming through and mounting the hammock, the Indians are firing. They have a disadvantage.
Yes.
Problem is, Jessup has 1,500 men versus 200 or 300 Seminoles.
Sure.
So they begin to outflank, and that's when the Seminoles go to their second position. They were very close. It's the only battle where they had two positions. They cut across the land, and we will show you Indian Crossing. Indian Crossing means a ford in a river where the water was only 4 feet deep.
Okay.
And they could walk across or ride their horses across.
Right.
So they go across to Indian Crossing, and now the Tennessee Volunteers and the Dragoons are in hot pursuit.
Right.
And the Tennesseans get pinned at Indian Crossing behind the trees.
And as I understand it, with Jessup, and he kind of sensed this isn't going to work, and so they put up a white flag?
Not yet, no. The general has a couple of things to prove, which when we read the history, and I suggest to everyone, please read it. It's terrific. It's dynamic. It's not boring. It's what you want to read. He goes to he sees the Tennesseans pinned behind the trees, and he wants to make a point desperately. He had been a line soldier. He had not been a line soldier. He had been a quartermaster general. He wanted to be a line soldier. So he had a point to did is he rode up on his horse, he whipped out his pistol, and he said, "Come on, men, to the Tennessee Volunteers, follow me." They didn't move. He was so enraged they didn't follow his orders, he ran to the river himself.
Okay.
And then he turned around to see if they followed, and sure enough, they had not followed him. Just then a musket ball hits him right under the eye, breaks his glasses, and cuts his cheek. If he hadn't turned his head, he would have been shot through the head.
So how did they get into the fort and as a surrender thing?
Well, after the battle, I'll tell you how the battle ended first. The Dragoons, who should have been up front where the heavy firing was, were back here, south. They didn't lose one soldier, whereas the Tennesseans lost quite a few, right in the middle of it. Colonel Harney, who's back here now, he's a career soldier, and he was very outstanding. He must have he was beside himself. He must have wanted to get into the action, so he took 15 soldiers across the deep end of the river.
Yeah.
And they had a problem getting across, but they did get across, and in doing so, the Seminoles saw that they had been flanked, came in on their flank, and they disappeared into the swamps. And that ended the second battle of the Loxahatchee. The first battle of Loxahatchee was 9 days earlier. After the battle, they do a 5-mile march to Pennock Point, which is now dubbed Fort Jupiter. And there, the High Command is talking to the general, and they're saying, you know, this is useless. We're losing men. We're losing treasure. Please write a communique to the Secretary of War and ask him if we can't please leave the Seminoles and the reservation in this area someplace.
Okay.
So he does it. Jessup does it. In good faith, he writes a communique to the Secretary of War, and now they're in a waiting mode to get an answer.
So they're right up here at the fort?
They're at the fort. They're
Just
all
waiting
at the
for an
fort
answer.
waiting for an answer from Washington.
And when we come back, we're going to find out what that answer is and more about this fascinating story with Richard Procyk, Guns Across the Loxahatchee. Come back.
Unusual pain in your back, neck, jaw, one or both arms, even your upper stomach are signs you're having a heart attack. Don't make excuses. Make the call to 911 immediately. Learn more at womenshealth.gov/heartattack.
Thanks for coming back. I'm sitting here with Richard Procyk and really just finding out a lot about what happened in Palm Beach County during the Second Seminole War, and actually before that 5,000 years ago. And we've got to the point now where General Jessup, Tennessee Volunteers, blacks, Seminoles have come to a point where they're waiting for an answer from the United States government on giving the Native Americans everything south of Palm Beach County. And so now Richard, what happens to this story?
On St. Patrick's Day, the answer comes in that no, there will be no reservation, the war will continue. Now in the meantime, Jessup had put the word out for all the tribes to come in. First he had 513 of the Seminoles and the black Seminoles come in,
right.
And now, right on St. Patrick's Day, they're still coming in. He's got over 600. So what he did, back to his old bag of tricks, what he did was throw up, they had put up a white flag of truce, by the way, in the meantime.
Right.
So that, you know, this was, we're waiting for the government. You know, we're not captured, we're here freely.
Sure.
Well, he goes in, he has Colonel Twiggs, David Twiggs, throw the army around them and capture them. And under a white flag of truce, which he did this about 1, 2, 3, 4 times.
So this is right up here.
It's right here at Pennock Point.
Pennock Point.
Which is in the book. It shows an aerial of Pennock Point.
Okay.
And so now we're going to be doing soon, it was the Trail of Tears.
Okay.
Because now the 600 plus are going to be moved across
state of Florida.
The state of Florida, right through this battlefield. It was the Trail of Tears. This is going right through this battlefield and heading for Fort Brooke.
Which is where?
Tampa, Florida.
Tampa, Florida.
Right.
And from Tampa, Florida,
and then from Tampa, Florida, they're boarded on boats and they're taken across to Baton Rouge and St. Augustine.
New Orleans?
New Orleans,
yeah.
Right.
Headed to Oklahoma.
And there's a stall there, and then they begin to process them. In the meantime, the Seminoles here are still fighting. Now we still have another war to fight.
Oh, so some remain.
Some remain.
A lot went on the Trail of Tears.
And some went early.
Okay.
Right. In fact, Abraham, who we've neglected to mention, who was one of the most important persons, Abraham was a black Seminole, highly intelligent, who was the prime minister, if you will, of the Seminoles when Micanopy, who was basically incompetent, he was really running the Seminoles. And he finally was transported west in 1839. Cocoche was arrested in 1841 by William Tecumseh Sherman, famous general during the Civil War, right here at Fort Pierce.
Oh.
But they didn't take him across until after 41, probably 1842. And then his band of 200 and all the rest were gradually moved west into Oklahoma and Arkansas.
Okay. So I understand once they were out there, some of them didn't remain there. They went and fought for Mexico.
Well, they were very unhappy with what happened. When they moved them into Indian Territory, the Seminoles replaced with the Creeks. They're old enemies. They had been fighting the Creeks for 30 years as enemies, and now they put the black Seminoles and the red Seminoles in the middle of the Creeks, who had the dominant role. There were more of them.
Sure.
And they were in charge. Of course, that didn't wash.
Okay.
And the Seminoles said, we can't do that. So he and John Horse Cavallo, we had little time to talk about John Horse, and he was one of the major, like Abraham, one of the major players. So we had two leaders, directing the Seminoles and the
Cocoche.
Black Seminoles,
Right.
Cocoche and John Horse Cavallo.
Right.
Okay, they're both taking them. Now they're very unhappy in Indian territory, and Cocoche intelligently leaves, sneaks through, and goes into Mexico and makes a deal with Mexico.
Okay.
The deal is that the Seminoles will come into Mexico, and they will handle the Apaches and the Comanches for the Mexican government. Well, how could they do that? Because they were great fighters.
Right.
They were unbelievable fighters.
And their reputation
And their
said
reputation preceded them. So
Absolutely.
it wasn't like they had to prove anything.
They know how to do that.
And he says, yeah, we know.
Right.
We know how good you are. Oh, yeah, please. First, I have to contact the government and make sure it's okay, which he does. Oh, yeah. As soon as they heard that, the government gave him permission. So John came over with 100 men and women and children into Fort Duncan and was accepted. And their commander was Major Bullis.
Mm-hmm.
I have to remember these names, Bullis. And Bullis had fought in the Civil War with the black troops.
Right.
So he understood the psychology of working with them, and he was terrific with them. And by this is happening in 1870. July the 4th, by the way, July the 4th, 1870 is when they crossed the Rio Grande into Texas, and in Fort Duncan the deal was being made.
Superb.
Okay, now the deal is made, and now we have the Black Seminole Scouts in Texas.
And they were.
And they are, right off the bat, are phenomenal. They put them right on to the Comanches, and the Comanches, the word came back, they weren't the least bit happy to hear that the Black Seminoles were now in Texas and guarding the border.
And weren't they given a particular name?
Yes, and that comes not right away, 1871 to 1873. In 1873, there was an incident, and the incident was that a group of Comanches had come in and stolen a herd of cattle. And the major sent the boys and himself. He always went with the boys. He never always participated. He went, and they were only five of them were out there when the Comanches suddenly came out of nowhere, and the five of them held 25 Comanches off and got their reputation really imbued, and it was at that time, in 1873, that they got the name Buffalo Soldier. And that went on until 1883.
Yes.
And at that time, 4 of them received the Medal of Honor from the government, and the major caught the attention of the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, who raised him all the way to Brigadier General. That is a fascinating piece of history.
It absolutely
that
is.
People don't really know.
Well, they know it now, and that's why we're here. We appreciate, Richard, you taking us through and telling this fascinating story of history. And remember, a lot of history has been talked about. But as he said, it started here, way back when, and it ended up in Texas. And what started here, we know as Buffalo Soldiers. But Palm Beach County was where it all began. Richard, thank you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.